once again launched attacks against the UAE. And twice in the past week, Yemen's rebels have launched attacks with missiles and drones on the UAE, a major escalation for one of the world's most protracted conflicts. To talk to us about this is Senior Fellow Africa-Asia Dialogues, Thembisa Ebrahim Fakude. Assalamu alaikum to you, Ibrahim. Welcome to the program.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
So these attacks underscore how the war that has been ongoing for over 7 years in the corner of the Arabian Peninsula. And I guess the question really is, can this flare up into a regional danger, a regional conflict? Could other Arab nations get involved? And if that does happen, how's that scenario going to look like?
Well, when the war started in 2015, it involved the number of Gulf countries. So the Saudi-led coalition invited other Arab countries to join in the fight in Yemen. That included like Sudan, Bahrain, and the UAE in particular. So it is already involving other stakeholders in the region. But I think that the most important thing to note is that it has also invited the involvement of Iran in the fight in Yemen, because Iran's expansionist program has always been that of supporting smaller parties within various countries in order for them to further their foreign policy and interest in those countries. So Yemen was one of those countries. We know that in Lebanon, Iran works with Hezbollah, and even there, Iran has continued to create instability. In Syria, Iran was also involved in supporting the regime of Bashar al-Assad. It's doing the same at the moment in Iraq. So the war in Yemen is likely to continue and is likely to involve various stakeholders, including various countries in the Middle East.
On is playing here, they have backed the Houthi rebels, and they have been doing so for a long time. Does this talk to the Sunni-Shia divide that we're aware of in that part of the world?
Yes, it does. Iran's intention is to have the Shia expansionist ideology throughout the Middle East. And the Arab countries, particularly in the Gulf, refused that domination in Yemen, because it would have meant that another Shia-dominated government would have existed in Yemen. We already know that the Gulf is dominated by majority Shia. You have Kuwait, which is majority Shia. Bahrain, although there's a Sunni leadership, but it's Shia. So Iraq is very much Shia, even though they're Arab Shia, they're not Persian Shia. You've got Iran, and there's also a sizable number of Shia in Qatar. So the Shia expansionist program is problematic. Syria, as it is with the Ba'athist ideology, is also very close to Shia. Then you have Oman also has its own version of Shia. So it is threatening to the Saudi Arabia, particularly as they continue to regard themselves as protectors or custodians of Sunni Islam. So they'll do whatever it takes for them to stop the expansion of Shia ideology within the region. The other important point is that Yemen is regarded as the homeland of all Arabs. You know that even the majority of the Saudis, before there was no Saudi Arabia, many of them came from Yemen. Osama bin Laden's family historically is traced back to Yemen. So Yemen is known as an Arab homeland. Most Arabs claim Yemen to be their homeland. So Saudis wouldn't have allowed a homeland, in inverted commas, to be dominated by Iran. And I think this is why it was easy for them to sell this idea to other Gulf countries to join the coalition against the Houthi in 2015.
Ibrahim, how is this going to look like in a couple of months or years' time if the conflict continues? We know that already the conflict has killed tens of thousands of civilians and fighters in Yemen and created created a humanitarian disaster in one of the Arab world's poorest countries, and that is Yemen. They undoubtedly are going to continue with the conflict. The Yemenis obviously are going to continue with this conflict. How do you see it panning out?
Well, already it's a disaster. There's a humanitarian disaster. Millions of people have been displaced in Yemen, most of them internally, and some of them have since fled to neighboring countries. So there is a humanitarian disaster in Yemen. But also, we've seen the United Nations issuing a statement a couple of days ago after the Houthis claimed that they've sent rockets to the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia. But the United Nations have dragged its feet over the years in terms of trying to sort out the problems in Yemen. So we are likely to see the deterioration, and there's no end in sight. When Mohammed bin Salman went on this war in 2015, he promised a swift war, and today, 2022, we're still talking about that conflict. So it's unlikely that it will end anytime soon, particularly with the involvement of Iran. And we see the sophistication now that the Houthis are applying in terms of their war strategy. It's clear and obvious that Iran is involved in terms of assisting and facilitating the war between the Houthis and the Arab countries that are currently fighting there. So I don't see any end in sight, but we are likely to see some sort of mediation. And the only country that can do so right now, I think, will be Qatar, because Qatar is at least seen as the friends of everyone, including the Yemenis, notwithstanding, of course, that they were part of the coalition when it started in 2016 and they were forced to pull out in 2017 when the countries such as Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and others led the blockade against Qatar. So Qatar has a better reputation. It enjoys good relationship with Iran, which is its neighbor just across the Gulf, depending where. So I think that mediation might come quite useful if indeed the Qataris decide to get involved.
Okay, so you have indicated, and we all are aware of the fact that this has been dragging on for quite a number of years now. What is the key reason for the war having escalated in recent times?
Well, the reason was triggered by the ousting of President Abdul Ali Saleh in Yemen after the Arab Spring. He fled to Saudi Arabia, then he started lobbying for support for him to be reinstalled in Yemen. So that's what triggered the current conflict. But the conflict has since, of course, turned into something else and developed into something totally different. And what made it worse was the advent of Iran into the conflict, because that presented another challenge, particularly for the Sunni countries in the Gulf, namely Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates. Most of them, of course, United Arab Emirates has always been interested in business, because if you look at where Yemen is situated, Yemen is strategically situated just between the Gulf and the Indian Ocean. So we know that the United Arab Emirates is very involved in the Dubai Ports company, and they need to establish their ports so that they can expand their business. That's one reason. But of course, there are other reasons, one of them being that Saudi Arabia will not allow another Shia country as its neighbor. So it will try by all means to make sure that it prevents that. But what Saudi Arabia did to sell the idea of the Arab countries joining into this coalition was that we need to stop Iran expansionism. And that's the main challenge, that's the main driving motivation that has led to all of these countries getting involved in Yemen.
Now, obviously, the Houthis have attacked the Emirates via drones and missiles over the past few days. Do you think there's going to be any repercussions?
There's already been repercussions. Saudi Arabia swiftly responded day before yesterday with rockets, injuring a number of people, including women and children in Sana'a. So there's been a tit for tat, and the United Arab Emirates has not responded. Instead, it has used its proxy, Saudi Arabia, to respond to the attacks. In return, the Houthis have vowed to continue their fight. They even threatened Dubai, which is the tourist attraction for the United Arab Emirates. So that might just disturb the business there. So it's going to continue. I don't see it ending anytime soon, as I've said, especially with the involvement of Iran.
And undoubtedly, the Houthis are saying that I guess one of the key reasons for the attack on the Emirates and the threats to Dubai is to destabilize those countries economically. I'm just kind of wondering what that's going to look like if it actually comes to pass. I think the whole of the Middle East will be in total shambles, in turmoil, because they are very, very dependent on all of that. That is, Dubai relies on its foreign tourism. It's built for the attraction of that foreign tourism trade.
That's very true. If this continues, it's likely to destabilize the economy and the economic activity in particularly the United Arab Emirates. But I think it's very simple. I mean, the Houthis are calling for cessation of hostilities, and they want Saudi Arabia basically to stop attacking them and colonizing them in inverted commas. But Saudi Arabia will never do that because we are too much into the game for them to accept defeat, because they will never accept defeat. But I think the best to do now is to have some sort of mediation, a much more honorable way of allowing Saudi Arabia to exit with dignity, because they've thought that they were fighting a small fish or a small organization in the form of the Houthis, but the Houthis have proved to be quite formidable, and they continue to embarrass Saudi Arabia, notwithstanding that Saudi Arabia continues to invest billions of dollars in sophisticated armory and arsenal. We know what happened during the time of Trump, for example, where they ordered a number of military hardware in order for them to fight the threats at the time which were posed by various nations. But now we see that a small army of the Houthis, who are only armed with AK-47s, are actually propelling and preventing Saudi Arabia from controlling Yemen. So until the Saudis and the the Emiratis stop the fighting in Yemen, we are unlikely to see any movement in terms of peace and stability in that country.
My final question, is mediation possible? Will it happen? And who would be the country that would do the mediating?
I think mediation is possible. You have still, by the way, United Nations, notwithstanding what I've said earlier on, is respected. They can do the mediation. But I think the country that can help is Qatar, because Qatar is a friend of everyone, at least for now. Qatar speaks to Iran. Iran and Qatar established a very strong relationship after the blockade in 2017, when these countries decided to blockade Qatar. Qatar is also very friendly and have a speaking relationship with the Houthis. So they are most likely to bring all parties together. And Qatar is also part of the GCC, which is the Gulf Cooperation Council in the region. So they work very closely with the Emiratis and the Saudis, being the member of that six-nation organization. So they stand a much more better chance, instead of speaking to everyone and bringing everyone to the table to try and solve this stalemate.
Inshallah, let's hope and pray that common sense does prevail and the mediation starts sooner rather than later. Shukran for your insights. Thembisa Ebrahim Fakude, you are the Senior Fellow Africa-Asia. You are with Africa-Asia Dialogues. I hope I've got that correct. You are the Senior Fellow Researcher there. Is that correct?
Correct, yes. Thank you.
Alhamdulillah. Nice talking to you. Till the next time, as always, Assalamu alaikum to you.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. Shukran.
And there you have it, the conflict in the Middle East between Yemen's Houthis and Saudi Arabia. That brings us to 8:47 a.m. And in a minute or two, inshallah, we're going to be talking with Abu Bakr Tapelo Ahmad. He is Al Jama's MMC for Development Planning in Johannesburg. So do stay with us.